Hello, I'm David, and it's time for some daily bread. Well, we find ourselves now in a process of opening back up as a nation, a state, a community, and even as a church. And even in that, there are different ideas and thoughts about how that ought to happen, at what pace it ought to happen. Some are okay, let's just jump right back in. Others are saying, let's be patient, let's be careful, let's let this thing play out and stretch out. Just different ideas and thoughts and emotions about all of this. And one of the critical things for us is how we respond in all of that. I want to take you back to a scenario in the Old Testament that I think has some parallels with what we're experiencing. There are many similarities. There are many dissimilarities, so don't take this too far. But what I'm talking about is the return of the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. We know that that was a process. They've been in captivity for 70 years. They've been in captivity. And now they're having the opportunity to be able to return. Babylon, as a matter of fact, is out of the picture. Assyria is now the dominant ruling force in the world. The Medo-Persian Empire, I guess we should say it that way. But as they begin to return, it is a process of return, isn't it? It's not just, okay, they all come back at the same time and boom, everything is like it used to be. It wasn't that at all. Nehemiah leads the first group back. They rebuild the city walls. Ezra is going to lead a group back, and they're going to begin to rebuild the temple. And there is an incident in that I want to draw our attention to today. And this is in Ezra chapter 3, when the foundation of the temple is laid. And when that happens, man, there is a big response, an emotional response from the people about that happening. But what's interesting is there were different emotional responses on either end of the spectrum. There were those who rejoiced. They shouted for joy about the temple is being rebuilt. The foundation is laid. There are others who wept over that. They were in sorrow. Two very different emotional responses to precisely the same thing. Those who rejoiced, we can understand why they rejoiced. I mean, the temple's been destroyed for 70 years and now it's being rebuilt, and what a joyous occasion that is. We're told that those who were weeping were the older men who remembered the previous temple. And in all likelihood, they were thinking, this one's not going to be anything like that one was. Things in Jerusalem and around the temple will not return to what they were, and they wept. And the text actually says, this is Ezra chapter 3, verses 11 through 13, if you want to read this. The shout was loud, but it was indistinguishable. That is, there were as many rejoicing, and they were as loud in their rejoicing as there were who were weeping and were loud in their weeping. Here's what I want you to notice. Scripture doesn't tell us that one group was right and the other group was wrong. Scripture doesn't tell us what those who were rejoicing were thinking about those who were weeping, or what those who were weeping were thinking about those who were rejoicing. Now, you can only imagine, because people are people. And those who rejoiced were probably, well, what's wrong with those people who are weeping? Why aren't they rejoicing? We're rejoicing. We're happy. They ought to be happy like we're happy. And those who were weeping may have thought, why are they rejoicing? This is a sad thing, because obviously this temple that's being built is not going to be anything like the temple that was here before. They ought to be weeping like we're weeping. We think people ought to feel and think like we feel and think. Now, our tendency is to take it even further than that. We automatically assume that what we think and feel is right. And if we don't think it's right, we're going to change it, won't we? So we think it's right, and others who think and feel differently are wrong. Now, I think that's where we make a mistake many times, is that just because someone is responding differently than I am responding doesn't mean they are wrong in responding that way. I think that's one of the things we learn from this incident. There is no proclamation of right and wrong. I mean, you move forward in time, And yes, these people struggle. There are some real hardships ahead of them. They don't carry through with this temple. As a matter of fact, they kind of stall out in the building of the temple and they have to be restarted again. And it's a difficult time. But it is true that it is from this beginning point that they do eventually we get to the New Testament, and the temple is there, and Jesus comes to this very temple that is beginning to be built here. And so God does work through this situation. But here is the thing. As we see others around us who have a very different emotional response to what's going on, and have different ideas about how things ought to play out, let's guard against turning immediately critical to those in our minds who are responding differently than we're responding. That's not an appropriate response as a Christian, as a child of God. We need to be gracious to others, recognizing they're looking at things from a different perspective than we may be looking at them from. And they have not only a right, they have a responsibility to respond emotionally as they are responding. Let's learn from this. I think there are other things we can learn as well, but let's learn from this incident of the Jewish people returning to Jerusalem and what was happening. As we return to what we want to be a more normal life, let's be gracious to one another.